Mhm. 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 Mhm.
Welcome, welcome very much to Conversations, where I got a dear friend of mine, Tom Kiely, is here. He, along with Lenny Charles, had started the INN World Report, a major pioneering effort at providing television news coverage and so forth back in the early days when things were just getting started. And he's now got a program that he does for the INN World Report radio. He has a radio series that goes out, and he's a person who's studied and got a certain interesting take on the human condition and about the situation, about the conveying of understanding of the human condition by the news reporting or by the media. And we're going to be talking about that and other matters. Always good to see you, Tom. Welcome to the set.
Well, it's always a pleasure, Harold, to come and be with you on your long-standing tradition of your show.
I should have a big beard, huh? I should have a big beard or something like Rip Van Winkle.
Father Time, when it comes to alternative media, I would certainly say you're one of the great pioneers when it comes to that, and it's always an honor to be on your show.
I'm not sure if I'm alternate. You think I'm alternate media? Maybe. Okay, it doesn't matter.
It's an alternative to the corporate.
Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. We can try to run that thing down.
Very good.
You think of yourself as being involved with and respecting alternate media as opposed to the established media, or what's your take in terms of the media coverage of the human scenario as it's being as it has been presented, and the trends therein in terms as we look ahead to the future?
Well, I think for a long time it has been very expensive to produce broadcast media, broadly cast, out into the ethers, right? Yeah. So hence the famous expression, freedom of the press is only for those who could afford one.
Yeah,
right. And so, even though in the early days of radio and television and printed newspapers, there seemed to be an awful lot, it typically was a lot of money to put them out, and now we've even seen a more of a consolidation, so it's more concentrated in the hands of a few, even more powerful, more wealthy people. And then with the advent of one of your favorite subjects, technology, it became much cheaper to produce media, television, radio, all of that, especially with digital now. So it opened up an alternative to the traditional corporate media. So that's where, in my mind anyway, the term alternative media comes from.
Yeah, we're talking mostly about the electronic media. There has been media before. There were spreadsheets at the time of Washington and so forth, and
mimeograph. We were talking
mimeographs, and I can remember. Do you remember? Did you ever do that where you had to run off the thing about the student demonstration that's coming? You had to do it by hand on a mimeograph machine.
I remember those for tests and so forth when I was a young child in school, and you could smell the chemicals coming off them and so forth. But a little bit later on, during the Vietnam era, I was in the service, and I was involved in what we used to call the coffee house movement, where we put out our own GI newspaper, for instance, and it wasn't mimeograph per se, but it was some other technology by then. But
it was kind of alternative. Was it alternative?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
It was you put out an alternative thing within the military?
Not within the military. While I was serving in the military, off post, there was something called the coffee house movement during the Vietnam War.
What was that?
Yeah, you can look it up on the internet if you'd like. You can find information. Look up the GI coffee house movement.
Tell me, what will I find?
Well, unlike today, where back in those days there was a preponderance of drafted people, conscripted people in the military. So the mindset was totally different than, in many respects, than what you have today. People didn't want to be there, and putting your life on the line sort of gives you a little bit of clarity, as to what the hell am I involved with here, So hence the great protests during the Vietnam War, I think, because so many people's lives were disrupted by being conscripted to go disrupt and destroy lives of other people.
War is a very disruptive element in the human condition. I mean, it's
well,
a terrible thing.
You would think so, but it doesn't seem to be so much anymore over in this country. In the Vietnam era, it was disruptive not only in Vietnam, but it was also very disruptive around the world and in this country as well.
And it tore the country apart.
Absolutely. Not anymore. No, because
that would be something
they got rid of the draft.
Well, yes, and also was it a different kind of thing when we were sending hundreds of thousands of troops and putting such an all-out campaign on that country that was destined to lose the war that we were fighting against some evil force that was threatening us.
Well, that was what we were sold
establishments-
and told by, among others, the mainstream media, but and the Gulf of Tonkin lie and the rest of it.
All of that. And how did it get to be where we were able to be sold such a bill of goods by our intellectual and political leadership that this was an existential fight of great significance, like the Second World War or something like that, and have it stick enough until finally it caught up? The intrinsic unacceptability of the premise or the strategy came to be obvious when they got on helicopters off the American embassy in utter defeat.
Well, I mean, if I may finish what I was saying originally,
Yeah, okay.
back in those days, there was, I think, a very different mindset in the military and in the country. Okay, there was more of a focus, as which challenged the lies that were used to sell that war and most all wars. But in that war in particular. And because of that, people sought the truth, sought alternative ways of informing themselves. Noam Chomsky was a big person in those days, talking about Vietnam and so forth. So in the military, there was a lot of people didn't want to be there. A lot of people didn't want to kill other people. A lot of people didn't want to be killed killing other people. And there was this thing called the coffee house movement. And GIs would put their money together, rent a storefront near the post, near the base. And it was a place where GIs could go and have coffee and talk politics and talk about what was going on, what was really going on. They were coming in from all different parts of the world and so forth. And we used to have people come and give talks, like the great Bill Schaap, for instance, here in New York City.
I love Bill Schaap. Ellen Ray?
I met Bill Schaap and Ellen Ray in
great.
Berlin.
I love Bill Schaap.
In West Berlin. I met them in West Berlin
people,
in the early 1970s.
Did you really?
Coming to our GI coffee house as part of the GI coffee house movement.
Was that an ongoing thing with you and Bill and Ella?
We had dealings with each other for about a year, and then after I got out of the service and I moved here to New York City, we used to get together for dinner once in a while. The guy just passed away about a year ago.
So that was a protest movement for a war that had to build, and people were still singing the praises of the people, saying this was an existential, absolute challenge that we had to fight and win, or else they would be soon in San Francisco taking advantage of our lonely ladies or something like that.
Well, if you remember the great joke, there's been this recruiting station in the heart of Times Square since I was a child, anyway. And I think it's still there. And back in the Vietnam era, I think this joke was heard on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, which itself was a very, very daring television program which challenged Johnson and the Vietnam logic on the air, and it cost them the show. Actually, they got thrown off the air finally because censored.
There was a lot of that kind of
There's
stuff.
a great documentary about it called Smothered. But they had a joke on that show. They were very critical of the Vietnam War. Pete Seeger made his first performance post being blacklisted, and he sang that great song, The Big Muddy, on that show. And they fought that. The censors didn't want that song. But anyway, there was a joke on that show about this recruiting station at Times Square where this young hippie goes up to the recruiter who's trying to recruit him, and he says, well, what do you need me in the military for? And the guy says, well, if it wasn't for the military, the Viet Cong would be right here in Times Square. And the kid says, well, I've never seen any Viet Cong right here in Times Square. And he says, see what a great job we're doing? That's the kind of logic that they used to use. And I think that, coming out of the World War II generation, coming out of World War II, that was an amazing transformation because, we were...
Now, that was a different proposition, the World War II. And the people who fought in that were really into the fight seriously, and they didn't challenge the idea, the premise that the war didn't make any sense.
That's right, because we were literally clearly attacked by another power. In the case of Japan.
So what was the intellectual underpinnings to their developing? How about the idea of George Kennan? George Kennan was a major geopolitical person that the whole establishment, Harvard Business or Harvard International Relations and everything, they were reading and making a sense of. And there was a thing called the strategy, the geostrategic.
The Washington
thing.
Consensus.
Well, it would be not only Washington, it was a general intellectual community consensus. It was the containment theory of George Kennan and some of the other admirals from Britain and so forth, and it was all accepted.
Well, who was it containing? It was containing the Soviets. It was containing communism.
Well,
okay?
Yes.
Right. Now,
yes.
Very interestingly, what I was trying to say before
Yeah.
is that prior, for the United States, World War II starts on December 7th, 1941, right? Okay, so what do you have prior to that? The Great Depression, the Red 30s, okay, the Red 30s they used to call it. Right here in New York City, there was a lot of activity. And there was a real question. The establishment was challenged. The people were flat on their backs. The establishment had failed them.
Well, it wasn't. It was still all kinds of people being destroyed. Tobacco Road and all the rest of the sort of stuff of the 30s. It was a pretty grim time.
Well, anybody who's listening to the program could look it up, the term the Red 30s. There was a serious concern by the elite, by the oligarchy in this country that people had it that we might go communist. So that was the attitude going into the war. The trade unions were at their peak, I think, and very strong. Yeah. And then World War II comes along, and my father's generation, like my father was only 17 years old. He volunteered, to go in. He couldn't even go in.
Which one then?
The Second War. The Second War. My father couldn't even go in because he was only 17. He had to have his parents sign a release that allowed him to go in. So an amazing effort, World War II, and just basically 4 short years, less than 4 short years. The United States comes up from being flat on its back, and tens of thousands of aircraft are being designed and produced and delivered, and going into combat. For instance, in tanks and trucks and it's just an amazing effort.
That's all there was after 40.
All these young men were part of that entire effort to get this stuff shipped across the seas and put into operation.
Well, you were fighting fascism in Germany, fascism and so forth, which had such an ugly face in the face of that, and it grew. And I was in Detroit, and that's where everything was.
The Liberators, the B-24.
They were building all the hardware to be sent over to Europe to fight the fascists.
The arsenal of democracy. So what happens is, these people that are angry and love Roosevelt and are pissed off at Wall Street.
We also had a Great Depression in the 30s that sort of pissed off, as you say.
Well, what I'm saying is they came out of that,
which was part of why the communists.
They came out of that,
was beginning to have some currency.
Right, but they came out of that process through World War II, coming out the other side as staunch anti-communists. Okay, they were laundered by World War II because the propaganda was, now we have to watch out for the Soviets. Well, in fact, the Soviets were our allies, and in fact won the war in Europe. By
30 million killed in the Soviet
Yes,
Union.
and they faced 200 German divisions, whereas in D-Day we only faced 88 of what was left over. And they actually really, really won the war in Europe. No question about it.
But so it was an all-in, all-out fight with Mrs. Miniver and these movies from the Second World War. It was a thing that everybody was in on it in the most patriotic way.
Right. Because we had our homeland, even though we, part of Hawaii was attacked. But what happened was Churchill was very clever, and he was one of these architects of the Cold War. So he quickly transformed that threat from the Nazis in Europe and the Imperial Japanese to our former allies, the Soviets. Okay, and that's because the Europeans had continually invaded the Russians. Napoleon in 1812. The Crimean War with the British.
Something else? He marched off. Come on, fellas, let's march off to Moscow.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that map of Taft or Tuft? I think his name is. He's an illustrator. The number of people that came out of Paris going toward Moscow, and then it dwindled down. And then it got down like this, and then the
Russian winter kicked them in the butt, as it always does.
Back, and it was just a horrible.
But think about it. Napoleon in 1812. Yeah. Okay. The British in the Crimean War. Okay. Then after the First World War, the British invade again, and they get the United States to invade from the east. U.S. troops invaded Russia in 1918.
The British invaded what?
Russia.
Russia?
During the Russian Revolution, during the Russian Civil War.
Oh.
From Archangel they came in. It's called the North Russian Intervention. Britain again invades Russia with an international coalition, gets the U.S. to participate, and everybody can look it up, the North Russian Intervention. And then, wait one second. And then in what was it, Barbarossa, in what was it, 39 or 40, the Nazis invade again with your 30, 40 million people dead. So the Russians have had it with all these crazy Europeans coming into Russia. So by the end of the war, where the Red Army stopped in Europe, in the western part of Germany, in the eastern part of Europe, Poland, and they said, look, you know, we're going to have a buffer zone now. So the next time you Europeans want to come in and get us, okay, we're going to have a buffer, and we'll be ready in Russia. By the time you get to Russia, you'll have to go through this. Where our army stopped. Behind us, we're going to control that. We're going to write their constitution. We're going to pick their government. And in Yalta and places like that, that was fine with the Allies, because the Allies had the same thing on the other side, in the western part of Germany. They controlled it. And the Allies got to keep all their colonial possessions in exchange, okay? The Philippines, Indochina, you know?
Africa,
you know, I mean, and also Singapore, you know, places like this. So this was a quid pro quo. It's portrayed as this great...
So how is all this done? Let's say in the annals of history, you have some people who set up the thinking of the pieces. There's a certain amount of propaganda or education of the people so that they will represent, they will get behind the effort of a warlike kind of thing being suggested by some of the intellectual and political leadership of nation A or nation B or something. How does that all work itself out? I mean, what are the major trends by which the information that we get is one that allows people to either see the wisdom of or the necessity of a particular military intervention somewhere, to where they are against it, like we were against Vietnam for some reason? What's the difference, and what are the intellectual underpinnings to what make possible ginning up for and creating a wartime
jingoism?
Well, jingoism's a loaded term, but it is part of that jingo. It can be
it's ginning up.
Or
literally, we're going to go get them by jingo.
Or it could be intellectual leadership of that too. Like
I don't think there's a lot of honest intellectual.
What are the underpinnings, geopolitical underpinnings of the thinking of the world leadership? Let's say.
Well, I think that it's
that have been relevant.
Hermann Goering has the great quote on war, you know, from his prison cell in Nuremberg, okay? And he's being interviewed by a U.S. military-paid psychologist to try to get in their heads and, you know, what were these Nazis thinking. And he's laughing at them, you know, he says, it makes no difference, democracy, totalitarianism, communism, it's the leaders who make the decision to go to war, and not the little guy. What's the little guy going to get out of a war that the best he can hope for is to come back home in one piece?
Yeah, right,
okay?
right. Yeah,
you know, what's a farmer? Why does he want to go abandon his field?
It's got to be ginned up to where they actually march off patriotically and fight for the people whose interests they're fighting for, not their own fighting.
You don't have to be ginned up if it's in your self-interest. If it's existential for you, you don't have to be ginned up.
Can it be made existentially important for the little guy who's brought in and with a rifle to go march into the fray or something?
I think in the old days.
People who are sitting in the the coffee houses having coffee and getting all the benefit of their leadership role politically or
back in the
economically.
Back in the day,
it's always been an aristocracy to run things.
Right.
And still is, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
So that's something.
Oligarchy.
There's always been an oligarchy. Always will be.
I believe there always will be. Sure.
In your view,
and I'd like to get back to that because I think that's the biggest blind spot that people have. You know, back in the day, I don't think it was as hard to gin people up because, you know, when you're a local oligarch, you know, and Europe is full of castles where local oligarchs used to live.
The castle keep?
Yeah, you go down the Rhine and they're all every other hill, you know, you can see another one. This is an oligarch who you know, got control of his area. And once he squeezes as much resources as he can, and I say he because most of them are he's.
It has been mostly,
right.
Elizabeth
once they squeeze as much resources as they can out of their little area, the only way to get more is to go knock off the oligarch across the street.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So these oligarchs, they're gross materialists. They've accumulated way more than they need. Okay. And they want more. They're insatiable.
They got the golden plates they're eating all.
Yeah.
The peasants are wallowing around in the mud.
They're eating off of silver, which probably saved a lot of their lives.
And the peasants are eating out of the
So
mud.
they go to knock off the oligarch next door.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right.
Steal his stuff.
Right. So now,
His grain,
I don't think you had to. When oligarch A gins up his people to go knock off oligarch B, I don't think oligarch B has to gin their people up too much because it's existential at that point.
Well, maybe that would be a neat thing. Or
You're coming into my house, my farm.
These rules also apply to the business world. Let's just say that because the war and so forth gets tied into economic interest that without not in a wartime necessary situation, but the same rules or the same propagandistic treatment of the people is more or less similar to having acceptance by the masses and even support for oligarchs who are ruling over them.
Well, for
patriotism, it's called.
For this country, the last time we had that sort of existential threat, if you want to call it that, was the Second War when part of the United States was attacked, invaded. All right. So, however, ever since then, after the Second War, they changed the name of the War Department to the Defense Department.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It's on purpose.
Percentage of our
the Defense Department. Yeah. Yet we've never had to defend the country again from attack. Yet we've been involved in so many wars. Okay, so these are wars of acquisition. These are imperial wars. Okay, you tell me, who has put up a credible threat against the United States of America actually invading our country since the end of World War II?
Well, there is, but then in the case of...
Yet how many wars have we engaged ourselves in?
These forces at play among the oligarchs who, you could say the establishment du jour of a particular historical period or something, they are going to want to be able to stir up those kind of sentiments and so forth.
Well, today they're called globalists.
It's called patriotism as a strong
no, it's false patriotism, and that's why it's fake news. Okay, because
fake news. Does this say fake news?
Yes, it says fake news.
Fake. Oh, they're good. That's good.
That's why it's fake news because people are decent and they don't want to go.
You think so? Right?
Kill. Well,
that's a general proposition.
I would say that everybody's got good and bad in them, no question, okay? It's just that the more power you have and the more money you have, the more you can act on the bad stuff as well as the good within you, okay?
You think so? Well, why not also you could act better on the good side?
You could, but I'm just saying rapacious oligarchs...
Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think it was somebody said.
Yeah.
Power tends to corrupt. I think it was
There's
Lord
few
Acton.
human beings who could avoid that corruption,
but
I think.
power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good argument for having it decentralized, you know. But anyway,
but then there's intellectual underpinnings to that too. Like the Second World War, it was all being out of the out of Harvard business, out of Harvard International Studies and all that kind of stuff. And you had a great big. I think mostly it was Lord Acton, and then there was also. There was an admiral or two out of the British. The British was a sea power, and they had been a sea power.
They're an empire. They're an empire.
But it was a sea power-based empire, and they had a thing
imperial.
Called the containment theory. That would be George Kennan. George Kennan
containing
was
who? Containing what?
What you're doing is they're containing the outward movement from what they call the heartland. And the heartland is that part of the Eurasian landmass that was invulnerable to sea power. Britain had been the first worldwide empire. Even Rome didn't do that, but they were a worldwide empire, and they had so they did a lot of strategic thinking. And then American.
I don't know if they were the first, but they certainly were the biggest.
Worldwide.
Well, the Portuguese were around the world. The Spanish were around the world.
In a certain sense, a real empire that had real clout in terms of everything.
Biggest. They were the biggest, but I would know if they certainly weren't the only one.
I think it was a qualitative difference, not just a quantitative difference between the two. But Britain, anyway, was very, very successful as a 19th century in that. But they had a view of the world, and you had the and they were sea power. And sea power was the main thing. And you have that whole Eurasian landmass. is looking out, and they had a little dictum. They said, who controls the East European plain? That would be Poland and Russia, controls the heartland. And the heartland was that part of the Eurasian landmass going out, including going out in Europe, and that was invulnerable to sea power. It was continentally invulnerable to sea power. Who controlled the world island? That would be called the world island. And who controlled
the Great Game?
It was
Afghanistan.
What's called the Great Game.
Afghanistan.
Central Asia. That Bactria in Alexander's time was Bactria and so forth, but it helped. But he said, and then he who controls the world island controls the world.
Well, there's
so
a lot.
That was thinking that informed the Vietnam thing. It informed them all. And it was George Kennan was the major person, the intellectual, to whom the politicos and the others who were influencing the situation.
And if we lost Vietnam, how would we be possibly threatened? And we lost Vietnam, not that we ever had it or it was ours to have, but we did lose there, and big deal. You know, I mean, it didn't affect the United States.
But it was based upon Kennan's containment theory. And then you had this communism thing.
Why did anything need to be contained unless you were a power-mad, hungry person that wanted to be a control freak for the world?
The Western civilized mission of the British and the Americans and the Europeans had to be advanced in order to keep
accrue more power and wealth.
To accrue more power and to bring civilization to
the white man's burden.
The white man's burden had to be, and they had the movement of history on their side, and you had a whole thing that was built around that. And when they went down, you come out of
a great rationale.
China
the white man's
falls
burden.
to communism, man. It's like a big red amoeba coming. It's coming out from the heartland. China's communist.
Well, we can't control it. You know, we can't control the Opium Wars. 2 of them. Okay, you know the British have been into China for a long time.
Very
Come on,
clever at doing it, but they did, and then when they were coming into Vietnam, they saw it like a big amoeba. You know, the amoeba coming out of the heartland.
Look.
It's going down, and it's going to take over China.
Come on,
it's going to take over.
The French.
This is what they thought.
This is not.
They thought it in the intellectual circles that they got across
Harold,
to the
come
population.
on. You're talking about it in the abstract.
No, in the abstract.
You're talking about it in the abstract.
Harvard.
No,
and
Vietnam.
George Kennan in his readings.
Vietnam was not some independent country that was going the wrong way. Vietnam was an occupied country, a colonialized country by the French.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
well,
and the Vietnam War was all about maintaining Western control of that country.
Yeah, and also
because the French couldn't do it. And during the Second War,
saw a creeping communism that's going to come out and take control.
It wouldn't make a difference if
China had fallen.
Come on, it wouldn't have made a difference if it was not communist. It was not. It was an independent country trying to gain its sovereignty back, and they happened to use communism as the vehicle. Okay, if it wasn't communism, it would have been something else. Now look,
that was the enemy du jour. Anyway,
because the communists were sympathetic to the aspirations of so many countries, like Vietnam, to regain their sovereignty.
Is that still hold?
Well, let me finish.
Who speaks for the
Look,
poor
Harold, speaking of World War II, okay, the Japanese came into Vietnam, kicked the French out, occupied it themselves. And what happened? The independence movement of Vietnam just went and started fighting a different colonial power, the Japanese. And what happened then? Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh were our allies during the Second World War. We were on the same side. We supplied Ho Chi Minh. U.S. pilots were flying the Burma Hump and so were trained if they got shot down in Vietnamese how to ask to be taken to see Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah, now how does it happen?
So he was our ally during the war.
Okay.
After the war was over, the Japanese are withdrawing. The Europeans haven't come back yet.
You mean Korea?
The Second War. Second World War.
You're back to the Second World War.
The Second World War. The Japanese are withdrawing their occupation of Vietnam. They hand Vietnam back to the Vietnamese people for the first time in 100 years or whatever, decades, right? And they said, look, have your country back, at least your fellow Asians, okay? And for a brief time, they had their country back until the Allies moved the British in to hold Vietnam for the French to return as a colonial power. Well, and at that moment, Ho Chi Minh made a beautiful appeal to the United States and said, hey, we were allies. This is the future. We're going to gain our sovereignty. We fought shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
Don't let the French come back in. We'll just kick them out. We'll fight them. And in Washington, there was an argument. And some people in Washington said, come on, what the hell did we fight this war for? Let these people have their country. And these containment jackasses, you know,
jackasses
won. And they said, no.
The leadership element in terms of
well, there was. I don't think it was
and they're still there.
Yeah. Well,
the leadership element is.
I don't know that
there.
it was
intellectual leadership.
They
element.
won a
and
fight. They won an intellectual fight.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And what is the intellectual leadership telling us about the human condition on this planet now, as we're talking?
I think what's more interesting is that
where do we get the ideas about how we're going to relate one to the other and so forth, and what are the major forces that are shaping the geopolitical reality now?
I think they're the same forces that shaped them all along. It's desire to be a control freak and to control. But you mentioned
imperialism.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
And
not as overt as it used to be. You know, now the control happens in different ways.
Has there
been
been any change in the material reality from when you did that? They used to have
there's a big change in the material reality.
Atomic weapons now.
There's a big change in the material reality. You mentioned the great Eurasian landmass, and the British were a naval power. You know, okay. So now you've got the revitalization of the Silk Road. Okay, the Chinese and the Russians have this amazing infrastructure project where they're putting high-speed rail that's going to run from.
Hey, what do you call it? They call that guy.
There's a way. Yeah, there's a
term for it.
Yeah.
I forget.
And this is freaking out the China's Western consensus. Because your Navy isn't going to have an impact on it, okay?
Okay.
All right? And all these goods and services can flow independently now of sea power, which is how it happens right now.
Yeah, well, it's been sea power.
And they're talking about going all the way to Portugal. They're talking about all the way to Madrid and Portugal with this thing. And it's going to be a prosperity sphere.
Land-based?
High-speed rail.
Yeah, right.
High-speed rail. It's this incredible infrastructure project. The Chinese are funding it.
Yeah.
It's going to be lots of jobs, lots of money, and it's going to be a whole nother way to get goods back and forth, you know, other than by sea, which is container ship the way it goes now.
That thing just crashed the other day, you know?
Yeah.
Into a destroyer.
Right. So this has really gotten them freaking out. This is why they wanted to put their foot into the heartland again, into Afghanistan, because this is all going to have to go through there, like the old Silk Roads did. Okay, and by the way,
Alexander went up there. It was called Bactria when he invaded from Greece. You know,
Rudyard Kipling made an allegory about it, right? In The Man Who Would Be King.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But anyway, so how is it done? How is it? Where are the thought patterns? Where are the geopolitical thinking that influence intellectuals? And what are that set up patterns of policy and so forth? And what are the major underpinning principles that seem to be advancing the way in which the world is being organized currently?
I think it's lucre.
It's always been that.
It's lucre. Lucre as it. I mean, this is just an incredible amount of it now that has been sucked up to vacuumed up to the top.
Yeah.
You know, people are hurting all around the world.
Been though, the people at the top were eating off golden plates.
But for their own survival, they had to give the masses here in the United States a bigger slice of the pie.
How about if we get to a situation
which they're taking back now? The middle class is being destroyed.
What about the proposition of some, myself, who would take some heart in the possibility that that through the technological development, things are being made available, like, for instance, water delivered to the home of everybody within a city now, whereas in the past you had to hopefully collect something off rainwater coming from the roof or something, or towed it up from the creek. But now water can be delivered to everybody within systems that are very, very efficient. They even have them where you got hot water, so everybody can take a warm bath, where they couldn't do that in the past. The living conditions possible by the technology for greater numbers of people are becoming to where maybe the whole condition of the class struggle, as grim as it has been and is so highly defined, maybe is becoming more and more one of where we can take care of everybody in a way. We can see taking care of everybody in terms of our capability to provide life support for everybody rather than just a few up in the
Well, capability is one thing, and what actually happens is another.
No, but capability has to be one. capability. If you didn't have the capability to have everybody getting a warm bath.
I understand,
in
but
the
we've had
9th century.
capabilities for a long time that are not implemented.
Yeah, but they should be taking account of the changing capability of our.
Who killed the electric car? You know, we had electric cars already.
What did? There would be competition.
Lucre killed it. Okay, Wall Street killed it. Power.
But Lucre, hasn't Lucre and business
imposed scarcity.
Hasn't that been also part of building it? Henry Ford built cars. He built them.
Sure.
They put them out, and they
Henry Ford paid his workers better than anybody else because he said they had to have enough money to buy one of his cars.
That's a very interesting thing because now the technology is coming where the robots are coming, and that's coming. You and I have talked. I think.
Sure.
The robots are coming beyond just plain economic.
So what are the people going to do?
Well, this is a point that is confronting at least people who try to think, I think, and that is that it's not only just information technology, which I think is probably going to displace a whole bunch of middle management people checking little boxes on spreadsheets.
Yeah, people. I came from that milieu. The people were sold on the idea when the factory jobs went away. Oh, just retrain yourself in technology and all that, and that's only going to last so long because that's going out now too.
Well, all right, but you make that point very glibly in a way, or I would try to and everything, but they're going.
But now it's being outsourced to cheaper sources of.
No, but cheaper. They're going to run out of.
And then they're going to have programs writing the programs.
They're going to be able to have the programs writing the programs in terms of information tech. All of these office buildings where people are sitting there filling in forms and doing everything that can be done by algorithmic things that can take.
And cars can be built by robots, and streets can be swept by robots.
Robotics is another thing.
Well, it's automation.
They did things they hadn't done a bunch. I've been watching.
So let me ask you something, Harold.
Touring and all that kind
let me
of
ask you
stuff.
something. Let's flash forward. 20 years. We're on the verge of self-driving vehicles.
That's correct.
That's 13 million jobs.
That's happening now.
That's 13 million driving jobs.
Yeah.
Truckers, taxi cab drivers, ambulance drivers, whatever. Fire truck drivers for that matter.
They're
okay.
Going to be delivering things
13
by drones.
million jobs. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Right.
Robots are going to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm trying to say they used to do that.
Right now.
Go ahead.
Those 13 that labor represented by those 13 million jobs is taxed.
Yeah.
They get a W-2. Are we going to tax the labor of robots? That's a good question, isn't it?
The larger question is, it seems to me, what it's creating tremendous capability to provide services that are of use, like warm showers.
And if people don't have any jobs to make the money to pay for that.
It's cold and these kind of things.
But you answer me. If robots displace everybody, they don't have the income to pay for that stuff. Okay, so now they're talking about a basic guaranteed income, right?
No, I don't know who's talking. Some left-wingers are talking about that.
No, the Swiss put it to a referendum about a year and a half ago.
They can provide that. But you're quite right. And those robotics is another kettle of fish from the information.
It's automation, it's technology.
But it's now coming. You're quite right. And it was Hans Moravec. They was down at Carnegie Mellon is where most of that research was going on, and they could get a little thing, walk across the room, bring you a cup or something. But it's going serious now, and toward exponential increasing of being able to do things without the need of human labor.
None other than Warren Buffett.
Vast capability to provide comfort and security and all kinds of things to the American or the world population that don't need workers in order to produce the outcome.
None other than Warren Buffett is talking about this now, this guaranteed basic income, which is
No, you jumped. Guaranteed.
Well, no, it's part and parcel. If the robots take the jobs away and the people don't have the jobs,
But it's got tremendous productive capability.
For
providing.
I understand, but productive capability only works in two ways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you're producing stuff that people have the money to buy,
but
or if you're producing stuff that you're giving away.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's a third possibility, I'd like to know what it is.
Commies would say just do away with the private sector and put everything into government, let the government run everything be done by an agency, there'd be justice and freedom. If you just listen to Karl Marx and become a communist and a socialist, that would be one thing. There's a lot of the world thinks that way.
And conversely, capitalism as we have it today is like, hey, I got mine, Jack, and you go get yours, and if you die in the process.
Grim,
So there's going to be something that is worked out that's somewhere between those two extremes, I think.
Yeah, but but the question really is, because you and I seem to differ, because my whole life has been dedicated to the fact that I think collectively and in human evolutionary terms, or we're part of a 13.7 trillion year sojourn in this universe, and I don't know, humans
that we know of. I mean,
Yeah, well, they found 40
Go
more.
back longer than that.
They announced yesterday, they found 40 more planets in universe that have the constituents of what we think of as life.
And there's such a thing as planetary engineering. There's planetary engineering that they're working on already to give Mars a habitable atmosphere. I mean, so what? I mean, so there's this many that are already there. There's so many more that can be made. In fact, there's some people that say that is the future of the human race, to split up as a species and start going out into space, because there won't be any room left here.
It seems a little absurd to me, but that doesn't matter. It's just me thinking. It seems sort of silly and everything. But the thing is that what it's doing is it's building this tremendously augmented and exponentially increasing capability of these systems for producing good results for the human condition in terms of elemental survival, and even on into what would be called middle class standards of living for everybody. There's a possibility for that, which has never even been gleaned in the past. It's a whole new world.
We've had that possibility on one level or another for a long time.
No, it's coming to a fruition
Possibilities
now.
And potentials are fascinating. It's not. Don't show me that. Show me the result. Okay, show me where you've got
the result for 20 years or so.
No, you're assuming that the power that be, the powers who can, the piper.
That's why I was asking about the powers that be to go to war and whatnot. Why are they putting 60% of our budget into a military?
Because
why are they doing that?
Because
in order to
I'll tell you why they why do they put 60? Can I answer your question?
Well, if you want, yeah.
Okay, I'm assuming you asked it to be answered.
Well,
because 0.01% of the population gets fat rich off of that 60%. That's why.
As always they have.
Right.
That's a continuation of history.
Right. This is a situation.
And it's a continuing of history, and it'll continue.
And how does that ancient thinking impact this very modern situation that we have?
One of the differences that has happened is that capability to provide, let's say, life support, water, warmth, comfort, security, all these kind of things, housing, all the things that we can do, we have a capability. But on the other, it's to where we're actually, and you could say the words and everybody would just laugh and everything, but we're actually transcending material scarcity at an ontologic capability level that is only now and has never been possible. So we're transcending history.
We have the potential.
And there's two vectors on that. One is the traditional way in which one power has gotten strong against another is this thing called war. And you can make a lot of money on war, and you can gin people up, and you can get a whole lot of things done, and you can create a lot of work and that kind of stuff. And war now
to create a lot of misery. You could get rid of a lot of human beings.
This is information that should be generally available to everybody, that the weapons that exist are no longer like the Gatling gun over the rifle. It's not a simple thing like that, where you have the bigger club than a smaller club, or some sort of thing by which you can hit each other on the head. It's now species lethal according to modeling. If they're unleashed, that means it's the end of this whole evolutionary
so what does that
process
tell you?
Called human.
So what does that tell you?
We're at a time of qualitative transformation.
It tells me that the people who are running the show went right through that species lethal stop sign with no care whatsoever. Okay, they blew that species lethal stop sign, and they're going in, and now they're pushing us to a possible confrontation of war with Russia, for God's sakes. Okay.
Well, those are some of the things.
So that tells me that it is within the human condition to have some freaks at the top who have no problem blowing through the stop sign that says we're beyond here is species lethal, and they've taken us there. Some people make the argument that that's climate change as well.
You're not talking about a reality. You're talking about a capability. You're not talking about a reality of the human condition being liberated, so everybody can realize their own potential
what is the
and
point?
Their capability without having to be under the gun all the time.
What is the point?
We're at a time of almost almost evolutionary, transformative, almost speciation moment in the evolution of affairs in the
So what's the
universe.
point of developing
Well,
techniques
we're
that
talking about it
would
once
stop
in a
the
while.
would
Oh,
stop the human race?
I beg
What's
your
the
pardon?
what is the point
That is
of developing
that's a-
technology
that's
that can destroy the human
That's
race?
a legacy from history. Because they
No,
used
we
to
never had it
They
before.
used to have siege machines. and they
Nah,
had
never had it
drugs,
before.
and
Not.
they had
No,
these
you're the one
other-
who brings up the fact that this is now species lethal. Okay,
No, there's science that shows that.
I understand, but this is a
It's
relatively
the
new.
Trident submarine.
It's
The
a new thing
Trident
on the scene.
submarines, Yeah.
Right, so
We haven't had
we've
that
blown
20 years ago.
we've
We
blown
didn't
through
have
that stop
50
sign.
years
The
ago.
people feel
Well,
some
yeah.
people feel they need to have that capability,
Yeah.
species
Of
lethal
course they do.
capability.
The whole of human history.
So what's
has
the
had
point of
that.
having species lethal? The only one thing I can see out of it,
Well,
it was
you're
what we used to
asking
call
for-
mutual assured destruction. Okay,
Well, that's
to put the brakes on these freaks at the top. Okay, but
Well,
they seem to be
that's
flirting with.
I think that's too simple because I don't know. Maybe
Mutual
I'm
assured
wrong.
destruction?
No, it's too simple to say they're freaks at the top and everything. I don't think you got people.
Well, you tell
know,
me.
you
tell me how you describe a person who wants species lethal capability in their hands.
They don't want species lethal capability.
They've developed it.
No,
They've got it.
developed it, but they've done that in order to.
How
make
did they
sure-
get it if they didn't want it?
Well, how did they get the Gatling gun instead of just?
That
a
wasn't
mere
species
musket?
lethal.
No, it wasn't. I know the whole
Yeah.
process, but the whole process.
You took issue.
200,000 years of human existence.
What kind of a
10,000
person?
generations.
What kind of a person wants to develop the capability
Well,
that
it's
will
the same
destroy
kind of person.
everyone, including themselves?
They don't. That's going into another way of seeing it.
They did it.
That's,
It's
no,
been
that's a
done.
jump on history because in history it was one king in a little area somewhere would set up a thing and have all the resources. And everybody would wait on him and all that kind of stuff. And so you lived well. Now you can make it so everybody can live well. That's a capability that's on one hand,
And the
but it doesn't. It can't be addressed in our preliminary talk with you before.
I think we can, but I think you've
wait a
just
minute,
answered
wait a
your
minute,
own
let me
question.
finish, because we had a little preliminary talk before the camera, okay, before it started, and you said the one thing that they have to get over is that there is not enough. Scarcity is an inherent situation, and you might as well get used to it.
I
And
didn't say
people
that.
aren't- Well,
No.
that's what I heard you say.
No.
And that's the lesson
No.
out of all of history. There's not nearly enough. For
I
me to win, you have to lose.
No, I think you've answered
and
your own
that's
question.
assumed thinking of political responsibility.
You've answered your own question,
Have
okay?
I?
Because
I
the
haven't
people.
answered it significantly to
Well,
myself.
then let me tell me if this makes it any more clear. Then,
Oh,
okay?
speak, oh, Gord, what is it? What is it? Wisdom.
You're stepping on my lines, Harold. Let me
Oh, I'm
let me
sorry,
get
I
it
wouldn't
out. Let me
step
get it
on
out.
your
Look,
lines.
you've answered your own question.
Have
The
I?
people who have
I
driven
hope so.
the people who have driven
Yeah.
the species lethal capabilities
Are the
because they want
leaders.
that as a tool in their hands.
To fight the other guy.
Wait.
Yeah.
You have a species lethal capability because you may find it advantageous to delete the species, okay? All right, including yourself.
No, you found it to be able to have an advantage, a geopolitical advantage over the other.
But you can't ever use it.
Whoever's got the gun wins, and then the other gets the gun, gets the girl,
That's-
he gets the beer, he gets the steak, he gets the
This-
warm drink, he
that's-
gets everything if you win. If you
There's a
lose,
qualitative
you're in the gutter with nothing.
No. With species lethal capability, if it's
Well, it
used.
only happened to come to that because
Yeah.
that gave an advantage to a certain people. who
What
wanted to get
advantage?
all the
If it's
women.
ever used, if both sides
You
have
could
it
just
and it
go
gets
get the
used, then
women.
the guy who owns it is gone as well. Okay. So the answer
but
to
you're
your question
talking
is,
about reason when it's not. It's just a thing that's happened.
but they have it as a
But the
as a
more
potential.
important question is.
Well,
that's
let me
going
finish.
unnoticed.
You
Okay.
not let me finish.
Okay.
The answer to your question is the same people that have driven us to the point of giving them species lethal tools in multitudes.
I
It's
don't
not
think you
just
should make
atomic.
it them. You should make it us collectively. It's come to.
I
that.
didn't
That's
do
the
that.
point.
No, I voted against
that's
it, but they didn't listen to me.
No,
I said
no.
no. Let's not have
That's
species
a collective
lethal.
capability. I want to put it collectively.
No, it's not.
It's,
Don't put
it's
that
the
on
whole
me.
society.
No, I don't want
accepts
that. I don't want
No.
that. Maybe
They
you
accept-
do. Maybe
they-
you do want
no.
species lethal. I don't, and billions of other people don't either. But
It's a condition that informs the whole human condition. with
Harold, the
everybody.
answer to your question is that the same people, few people, who have driven military technology to the species lethal level because
Our
they want it in
leaders
their
over
hand
history have been
are the
leaders
same
of the
people. Harold,
military.
you keep talking over my lines,
Well,
Harold.
okay.
Are the same people
George Washington.
who have the power to end material scarcity. How about that? They are the same people. The same people who have driven us to species lethal technology are the same people who hold it in their hands That species lethal technology, as well as the ability to spread this technology and end material scarcity.
They won't talk, and they will not.
You've got to balance these two.
The one thing that they cannot.
That's
accept,
the answer to your question.
The one thing they cannot accept, and it is 10,000 generations, and we're talking about a generation. What's that? 60 years or 70, 80 years or something. 10,000 generations, and this is the defining generation from the reality, the existential reality, ontologic reality that has existed for 10,000 generations is suddenly different than what it has been throughout that whole 200,000 year sojourn of our planet on the
in at least two major characteristics.
And it's something new, and that's called, in evolutionary terms, it's an evolutionary change, not a political change that we're going through.
And that's
in
at least two different.
Can't get your mind around because it's like Galileo saying you're not the center of the universe.
Yep.
Messed people's identity up.
And for the
you mess with people's identity, they get upset.
And for the purposes of this conversation, the two major changes of which you speak are A, the fact that we can transcend material scarcity, and B, the fact that we now have in the hands of the powers that be species lethal technology.
I think those are two things that ought to be right on the drawing board of everybody, and it ought to be the consideration. We ought to have it. Is that true? Statistics should be made available, and particularly the thing about, look, we got enough for everybody. We have a capability that we're not bothering to give to make real, because we're all caught up with outdated thinking about scarcity and their ironclad laws. For one to win, somebody else has to lose.
Right.
And that's just caught up in our thinking.
And species,
as somehow
and look at the symmetry in what you bring up. Okay, for one to win, everyone. Now with species lethal, everybody loses, and with transcending material scarcity, everybody wins. How about that? What symmetry? What symmetry?
Well, yeah,
and it's in the hands of the same people.
I've been trying to say that for about 50 years, and everybody says, "Shut up." And let's get the guns, and who can we win, and how our party can win, and that party, and everybody's talking the same old thing. But I've been thinking that, and the good thinking, there's people who've been thinking that, and it may be its time is coming. So we ought to
which time?
it.
Everybody gets, or everybody gets annihilated?
Well, I would prefer that we liberate everyone. I think it would be like, I mean, we're learning things, we're getting smarter and everything, and there's I'm not sure, Tom, if it is, but I think it's something that I could be corrected. That's a nice thing. You got a thing called the Google or something. You can search things now. You remember stacks? You had to go in the stacks of things and get
but
anyway.
But all of this stuff has.
I'm going to lose the point if you don't let me talk.
All right.
That it's 200,000 years we've been in this condition. And now it's something new. I've lost it.
Okay.
But I had a really good idea.
But the flip side of that, Harold.
Don't let me lose that.
Very good. We'll get back to it, I'm sure.
Because there was something there.
The flip side of the Google is that these same people who hold in their hand the existential threat to humanity and the capability of unleashing technology to overcome material scarcity, they also are using Google to presume to figure you out and get inside your head and monitor what's of interest to you.
I think it needs some economic theorizing and everything. How are we going to form capital? How are we going to distribute buying power? Because you're going to be doing away with jobs with the robotization, and you're going to have a tremendous capability. And one Piketty, the guy in
Thomas Piketty,
being read, seems to me, by every thinking economist there is. He says that the problem is you're not going to get buying power into the hands of the people to clear the market. They got to have money,
right? And hence the guaranteed basic income.
Things that can be done, and they're going to do it through this idea of wage slavery that is held for a few thousand years.
Right.
That you got a bunch of slaves who go out and do what you tell them to do, and all that, and you got wage slaves, and then some people that don't.
But you're not driving your wage slaves because you want to give them something to do. You're driving your wage slaves because you're going to get something out of it. Once you've got robotic technology, you don't need the wage slaves anymore.
100,000. No, that's what I was trying
Who's
to
to say?
Shut up. I was thinking of this thing I'm thinking about. I think in a human organism, a person, okay? A human organism, I think, and somebody could make the correct, it's a fact. It could be found. I think there's something on the order of 200 trillion cells in the human organism.
The turnover every 7 years.
No, 200 trillion, and each cell has an individual identity, and each cell is intrinsically linked as a system to all other 200 trillion cells, and it functions as a system.
Mutual cooperation.
Yeah. It's a
symbiosis.
Miracle. It works sort of like that. Now, if you take that and you comply it, what do we got now? How many people are in the world? 7. We're about 7 billion, heading for 10, I guess, around it. And then if you take that as a metaphor, suppose you've got everybody realizing their own inner given sense of participation in a way that they are overwhelmingly pleased with doing, showing all the capability they have. They got all kinds of capability to be part of an overall thing. It's like a jam. You ever been in a? You've been in jam sessions. You play a trumpet or something.
Drums.
No, Gilad plays.
Yeah.
But anyway, he plays a saxophone. But you're playing and you guys are jamming.
Right.
Now I got to make the metaphor. The guys are jamming, right? And it's going like this, and everybody's playing, and then there's the piccolo, and there's the drums, and everything's in sync, right? Everything's in sync, and it goes.
Beethoven made symphonies.
No, wait a minute. It goes like the symphony with jazz. Let's say jazz, and it's going jump, 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 jump. Somebody goes jump. Somebody goes jump, and somebody goes jump. What the hell is that? I want jump, 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 jump. And it goes, jump, wait a minute, and you jump.
I feel like I'm on Sesame Street.
Somebody else picks it up, and then that's called progress, and the other guys pick it up, or gals, and they pick it up, and then it's at a higher level, and then it's where you got a big, gigantic jam session of a liberated humanity. That's going to intercommodate us to universe.
A liberated humanity. Transition.
At
the liberation.
At a liberated condition, comparable to punctuated equilibrium, the new appears.
That liberation.
And that vision is.
That liberation is of two types.
It's of everybody involved in having their own ability to provide their own sense of participation in a way that is everybody's in on the jam. And then there will be a resonancy, a synergy between our liberated humanity that we are privileged to be born into.
Liberated from what?
Liberated from history. History is a nightmare.
Liberated from the people.
History is a nightmare of injustice. This is James Joyce, no less, from which we're attempting to awaken. That we're born into a time when we're going to awaken evolutionarily into a new way of being in universe. We're speciating. We're not just going through a political change that everybody wants to try and reify the old dated out institutions. We're ushering in a period of qualitative, not quantitative change.
I think we're ushering in the potential for it, but whether it gets actualized or not.
No, but the potential is important because we didn't have the potential.
The potential to wipe out the species is there as well.
That's right. Just as we have the potential, we have
and they're both in the hands of the same people.
Potential that can be put on the drawing board in terms of actual policy that can be understood just as comprehensively appropriate as the destructive capability for liberating the whole species.
And
we can do that now. We'd never have been able to.
And they're both in the hands of the same oligarchs. Okay.
Yeah, but they always have been. That's just a normal problem.
But it's different, Harold. You said it 10 times. What has always been is totally different. Now it's total.
Well, it's going to come to total difference, but that's something that's worth.
But it's the same mindset. It's the same old people who have been running the show.
But the old people. I'm old. You're getting on there, and my dog even's getting old, and the young people are coming.
They don't listen to you.
And everybody's.
They don't listen to Harold Channer for decades, and I think that's all the time we have as well, Harold.
And,
so
and it's going to be put out on things like INN World Report. Congratulations for being a pioneer, you and Lenny.
Thank you for letting us talk about it.
And it is a pleasure for Tom Kiely. He's the co-founder, as you can see, INN World Report, and he's the host of INN World Report Radio, a really good radio series where he talks to important people. Thanks for viewing. We'll be coming back again, tomorrow. So that's it. Thank you, Josie Ann and Major League. Thank you. So over and out for now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Harold.
Yeah. Well, okay, we just got a couple of
seconds. All right.
Is there something important to say?
Well, I think people need to be listening to you.
Crying out loud.
It's the same people who can liberate humanity or enslave it forever or destroy it. That's the problem. And that's what we have to face.
A destroyer or a liberator?
The Dalai Lama calls it mutual interdependence.
He's somebody worth listening.